because they know they'll lose. They know that I'm prepared to ground the airline. They know that I can get the airline going again without them. And let there be no mistakes about this. Whoever governs Singapore must have that iron in him, or give it up. This is not a game of cards. This is your life and mine. I've spent a whole lifetime building this. And as long as I'm in charge, nobody's going to knock it down.
Born Harry Lee Kuan Yew, September 16, 1923 to March 23, 2015, often referred to by his initials LKY, was a Singaporean statesman and lawyer who served as the first Prime Minister of Singapore from 1959 to 1990 and Secretary-General of the People's Action Party from 1954 to 1992. He was the Member of Parliament for Tanjong Pagar from 1955 until his death in 2015. Lee is widely recognized as the founding father of the modern Singaporean state, and for his leadership in turning and transforming it into a highly developed country during his tenure. Lee was born in Singapore during British colonial rule. After graduating from Raffles Institution, he won a scholarship to Raffles College, now the National University of Singapore. During the Japanese occupation, Lee escaped being the victim of a purge before subsequently starting his own businesses while working as an administration service officer for the Japanese Propaganda Office. After World War II ended, Lee briefly attended the London School of Economics before transferring to Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge to study law, graduating with a double first degree in 1947. He was called to the bar from the Middle Temple in 1950. Upon his return to Singapore, he practiced as an advocate and solicitor whilst campaigning for the British to relinquish their colonial rule. Lee co-founded the People's Action Party in 1954 and won his first seat at the Tanjong Pagar division during the 1955 general election. He became the de facto opposition leader in Parliament to Chief Ministers David Marshall and Lim Yew Hock of the Labour Front. Lee led his party to its first electoral victory in 1959 and was appointed the state's first Prime Minister. To attain complete home rule from Britain, Lee campaigned for a merger with other former British territories in a national referendum to form Malaysia in 1963. Racial strife and ideological differences later led to Singapore's expulsion from Malaysia and subsequent independence in 1965, less than 2 years after the merger. With overwhelming parliamentary control at every general election, Lee oversaw Singapore's transformation into a developed country with a high-income economy within his premiership. In the process, he forged a highly effective, anti-corrupt government and civil service. Lee eschewed populist policies in favor of long-term social and economic planning, championing civic nationalism through meritocracy and multiracialism as governing principles, making English the lingua franca to integrate its immigrant society and to facilitate trade with the world, whilst mandating bilingualism in schools to preserve the students' mother tongue and ethnic identity. Lee stepped down as Prime Minister in 1990, but remained in the cabinet under his successors, holding the appointments of Senior Minister until 2004, then Minister Mentor until 2011. He died of pneumonia on March 23, 2015, at the age of 91. In a week of national mourning, about 1.7 million residents and world leaders paid tribute to him at his lying-in state at Parliament House and community tribute sites. An advocate for Asian values and a proponent of realpolitik pragmatism, Lee's premiership was described as authoritarian by the Western world or as a sort of guided democracy by scholars and the media. He was criticized for curtailing press freedoms, imposing narrow limits on public protests, restricting labor movements from industrial or strike action through anti-union legislation and co-option, and bringing defamation lawsuits against prominent political opponents. Lee directly responded to such critiques by stating that, "If Singapore is a nanny state, then I am proud to have fostered one." In addition, others have also argued that his actions were necessary and vital for the country's early development. Lee has been often described a benevolent dictator who fostered social well-being within an illiberal democratic framework. Lee continues to be held in high regard by Singaporeans. Early life. Lee was born on September 16, 1923, the first child of Lee Chin Koon, a Semarang-born Singaporean, and Chua Jim Neo, at 92, Kampong Java Road in Singapore, then part of the British Empire. Both of Lee's parents were English-educated third-generation Straits Chinese, with his paternal side being of Hakka descent from Davao County. He was named Kuan Yew, meaning light and brightness, alternately meaning bringing great glory to one's ancestors. Lee's paternal grandfather Lee Hoon Leong, who was described as especially westernized, had worked on British ships as a purser and hence gave Lee the Western name Harry. While the family spoke English as its first language, Lee also learned Malay. Lee would have 3 brothers and 1 sister, all of whom lived to old age. Lee was not close to his father, who worked as a storekeeper within the Shell Oil Company and had a gambling addiction. His mother Chua would often stand up against her husband for his poor financial management and parenting skills. The family was considered prosperous with a high social standing compared to recent immigrants and had the means to hire servants. During the Great Depression, the family fortunes declined considerably, though Lee's father retained his job at Shell. Later in life, Lee described his father as a man with a nasty temper and credited his mother with holding the family together amidst her husband's gambling addiction. In 1930, Lee enrolled at Telok Kurau English School, where he spent 6 years of his primary education. Attending Raffles Institution in 1935, Lee did poorly in his first 2 years, but later topped the junior Cambridge examinations. He also joined the Scouts and partook in several physical activities and debates. Lee was the top scorer in the senior Cambridge examinations in 1940 across the Strait Settlements and Malaya, gaining the John Anderson Scholarship to attend Raffles College. During the prize-awarding ceremony, Lee met his future wife Kwajik Chu. She was the only girl at the school. His subsequent university studies at Raffles College were disrupted by the onset of World War II in Asia, with the school being converted into a medical facility in 1941. The war arrived in December of that year, and following the British surrender in February 1942, the Japanese occupation of Singapore began. University, marriage, and politics. Lee chose not to return to Raffles College after the war and pursued higher education in the United Kingdom. He initially enrolled at the London School of Economics, but found himself disliking life in the British capital. He visited Cambridge in November and was introduced to W.S. Thatcher, censor of Fitzwilliam House. Prior to his departure from Singapore, Lee had begun a relationship with Kwa, whom he had kept in contact during the war. They married in secret at Stratford-upon-Avon in December. Lee achieved a first-class result in both the prelims and Part 1 of the Tripos, and graduated with a starred first for Part 2 Law in 1949. As the top student of his cohort, he was awarded the Fitzwilliams Whitlock Prize. Lee was called to the bar from the Middle Temple in 1950. During his studies, Lee's political convictions and anti-colonial sentiments were hardened by personal experiences and an increasing belief that the British were ruling Singapore for their own benefit. He supported the Labour Party against the Conservatives, whom he perceived as opposing decolonization. In the lead-up to the 1950 United Kingdom general election, Lee engaged in politics for the first time and actively campaigned for a friend, David Whitcomb, in Totnes constituency, driving Whitcomb around in a lorry and delivering several speeches on his behalf. Before returning to Singapore, Lee dropped his English name, Harry. Notwithstanding, even until the end of his life, old friends and relatives referred to him as Harry. Prime Minister, State of Singapore, 1959 to 1963. Lee's first speech as Prime Minister to a 50,000-strong audience at the Padang sought to dampen his supporters' euphoria of the P.P's electoral win. In the first month of Lee taking power, Singapore experienced an economic slump as foreign capital fell and Western businesses and expatriates left for Kuala Lumpur and Malaya, fearing the new government's anti-colonial zeal. As part of an anti-yellow culture drive, Lee banned jukeboxes and pinball machines, while the police under Home Affairs Minister Ong Peng Boon raided pubs and pornography publications. The government cracked down on secret societies, prostitution, and other illegal activities, with Time magazine later reporting that a full week passed without kidnapping, extortion, or gangland rumble for the first time. Lee also spearheaded several mobilization campaigns to clean the city, introduced air conditioning to government offices, and slashed the salaries of civil servants. The last act provoked anger from the sector, which Lee justified as necessary to balance the budget. In February 1960, the Housing and Development Board, HDB, superseded the Singapore Improvement Trust, SIT, and assumed responsibility of public housing. With strong government support, The HDB under Chairman Lim Kim San completed more flats in 3 years than its predecessor did in 32. Government expenditure for public utilities, healthcare, and education also increased significantly. By the end of the year, however, unemployment began to rise drastically as the economy slowed. Lee reversed anti-colonial policies and launched a 5-year plan to build new industries, seeking to attract foreign investors and rival Hong Kong. Jurong, a swampland to the island's western coast, was chosen to be the site of a new industrial estate and would house steel mills, shipyards, and oil refineries, though Finance Minister Goh Kang Swee was initially worried the venture would fail. The government promoted multiculturalism by recognizing Malay, English, Tamil, and Chinese as the official languages of the new state and sought to create a new national Malayan identity. The Ministry of Culture under S. Rajaratnam held free outdoor concerts with every ethnic race represented in the performances. Lee also introduced the People's Association, a government-linked organization to run community centers and youth clubs, with its leaders trained to spread the PAP's ideology. Youth unemployment was alleviated by the establishment of work brigades.